Please listen carefully.
Hello, I'm Peter Bell, and I'm here with Mr. Lobo Tiggre. Hello, Lobo.
Hi, Peter.
Wonderful to be talking with you. The first time I've had a chance to do an interview with you.
I'm glad to be on the show.
Been following you for years. The Independent Speculator, Louis James Independent Speculator. What a great vision and activity you have going on there. I appreciate reading your articles.
Sure thing. Well, you keyed in on something there. Louis James. I used to work for Doug Casey at Casey Research for many years, and he, of course, is the creator of the Independent Speculator, one of the flagship newsletters in the resource space and speculative investment space. So it's not a ripoff; it's a tribute to my mentor and friend Doug Casey, and I talked to him about it, and he gave me his blessing when I set up the Independent Speculator.
Oh, wonderful! I'm glad to hear all that. Thank you. A phrase that occurred to me at one point was patient speculator, and I've thrown that around.
Yeah, I thought about that. I thought of rational speculator too, because really there's a huge difference between, gambling or people who, get stricken by fear of missing out or whatever, throw all caution to the wind. And what Doug taught me, and also Rick Rule and all these other people who've had such a profound influence on my professional life, it's really about being cool, calm, collected, not quite Spock-like exactly, but you're very rational, and you can't let your emotions run away with you, or you'll get taken to the cleaners.
Yeah, certainly. Timeless lessons in there. It's amazing to go back to stuff that was written, 100 years ago and see some of these same themes popping up.
Absolutely. Graham, in his classic book, he's the father of value investing and, one of these respected stalwarts of Wall Street. And he repeatedly cautions about your biggest enemy being yourself. And, when he wrote in the Intelligent Investor that really it's, he almost apologizes for spending so much time on psychology because it's so important, because that's where most people go wrong.
Well, and a shout out to George Graham Rice, his book, My Adventures with Your Money. Brent Cook has talked about that a few times years gone by, and I've gone back and read it. It's for free. You can get it for free online, and it's past its copyright, the Gutenberg Press, and it's available, and it's amazing to read some of these timeless lessons of junior mining speculation written in Nevada in the 1880s.
I will have to make a note of that. That is a new one to me. So thank you for the tip. A great new read is always a welcome gift.
You're welcome. And thinking about psychology and everything, I just mentioned as well, just recently come along to having a full service broker myself, and I've been, was doing the online stuff prior to that for years and years. And the number of times the broker has provided me with some cautionary advice and has saved me from rushing into something that I might otherwise be very enthusiastic towards. It actually overwhelms, the number of deals that they've brought to me. And that was not something I expected at all.
Right. Yeah. A full service broker is very valuable. And that's just sort of the tip of the iceberg. It's not just about executing deals. An order taker, if you're going to do that, you might as well just get Robinhood, which, by the way, I use for some of my simple no-brain trades on U.S. listed stocks. Why pay a commission if I don't have to? And for people who are nervous about that, is this some tech startup that's going to disappear? I can't attest to the future, but I can say that it really is free. It really does work. I've had no problems with it. But I do use a full-service broker, and that kind of intel is highly useful. He also has more screens, more access to the data. He can see the bids and the asks on the information I can't see, and it can help me craft my bids to take advantage of the current market action in ways I couldn't do on my own, just watching Stock Watch or something. And of course, the big deal is being able to get in on private placements, and a good, well-connected broker makes a big difference there. And frankly, the private placements are much more the bread and butter of how Doug Casey built his fortune than trading on the open market.
The market tradecraft in all these different aspects is so important. And there's some discussion about it out there, but again, for the people watching this kind of content online and trying to do it themselves from home or whatever it may be, on their own, that's been something that's surprised me again, and I try to pass that along where I can. Just be careful out there, right?
Sure. No, and it makes sense, particularly for someone like me. I'm a newsletter writer, or as I'm often lovingly referred to, an evil scum of the earth newsletter writer, even. So I'm not allowed to give individuals advice. I can talk about what I'm writing about, and in fact, at independentspeculator.com, that's not just something I do. Sometimes it's the whole idea is that I only write about the stocks I'm willing to put my own hard-earned cash into. That's the
Yeah.
idea of the newsletter, the paid newsletter anyway. Free education, but the speculations are things I'm willing to put my own money into. But that's me talking about what I'm doing. I can't tell individuals what they should do, but a certified financial advisor can. A registered broker can tell you things that I, as a newsletter writer, couldn't do. So really, the hand fits the glove quite well there.
Well, and the psychology of the approach is so interesting as well. A lot of times, what gets served up to the general uh, public in terms of looking at junior mining speculative opportunities, right, is the things to like. What's good about a particular situation, and there's not often a lot of time spent on the downside potential there, the concerns. Um, and there's different people who approach these situations. Some of them focus entirely on looking for things to like, and then there's others who they look for the fatal flaws, and that distinction again is just so important.
Yes, and to give credit where due of my many esteemed peers, I think the one I hold in the highest regard is Brent Cook, whom you mentioned at the beginning there, and he's famous for that. Not only being willing to tell you when something goes wrong and looking for that fatal flaw before it happens to get him himself and his subscribers out. He's willing to go on the public record and just trash a company that's doing a bad job. It's amusing to watch. I don't know. I don't know how that business model works, frankly, but I'm so glad that he's out there doing that because he's so clearly on the side of the investor,
Yep.
and I think the sector needs more people like that.
Well, and I think they're out there, right? But it's with the internet, there's all these new platforms and ways to communicate, um, all these discussions happening all the time around all these different stories. And the hard part for the people watching and trying to understand all this is some degree of objectivity in terms of listening to what people are trying to tell you.
Yeah, well, yes and no. I agree with what you're saying, but I also think most people have a fair amount of sense. And if you're watching something and the interviewer and the interviewee are in some kind of love fest where they're all so happy and everything is great and there are no hard questions. There's no, well, wait a minute, let me push back here. There's it's hard to take that, I think, too seriously. And I think most people can or should have the sense to say, oh, wait a minute, this is a one-sided conversation here. I want something more objective. And
Yep.
fortunately, there is more of that out there. It's one thing I try to do with. We have a series of interviews I do on my website. We call them In the Pit because the idea is sort of like a Shark Tank with Lobo Tiggre, in the pit with a wolf there. And I ask the hard questions that investors should ask. How are you going to pay for that? Why is the permitting delayed, and so on.
Wonderful. Yeah, I've seen some of those. Thank you very much for putting them out there. It benefits the quality of discourse, I think, in the entire community.
Yeah, I don't want to harp on that, but it's interesting to me. When I started it sort of evolved by accident. I just started doing interviews,
Yeah.
and then I asked some hard questions just because it seemed natural to me. And the CEO was kind of like, well, I don't know. Well, I guess it's probably better to put this out there, and people see that I can answer the hard questions, and it just sort of took off from there. And I was had some concern. Would people be willing to agree to step into the pit with me? If I wasn't just going to ask the polite, nice questions and tell them how great their project is. And it's interesting how many people really are. They're like, yeah, bring it on. I can answer those questions, and I should answer those questions. Um, you know, I have had a few people decline, but it's been interesting to me to see how many people really are, at least true believers in their project enough to be willing to face the hard questions.
Yeah. Well, in the search for the Tenbaggers, right? Um,
Yeah.
there's you have to face a bright light sometimes.
It could be that my reputation filters some out. If you know that you don't want to go there, then you wouldn't write to me and ask me to have a look at your company.
Yeah. Well, and reading your article about Tenbaggers and what it takes to secure them, it's interesting to read you write about how you have to be willing to accept more losses than gains, and it's certainly the case.
Yeah.
Shout out to Chris Mayer with his wonderful book Hundred Baggers, there, encyclopedia of hundred baggers as well. Uh, One of the things that always occurs to me with these Tenbaggers is kind of, if you sell on a double, you're never going to get a triple, and if this that psychology as well.
No, wait a minute. No, if it's a 10 bagger and you sell on a double, you get 5 times your money instead of 10. That's not too bad. I actually had people, I remember my Casey days. It's interesting. You sign up for something called the International Speculator back in the day, or today, the Independent Speculator. You're speculating, and you know that you're going to take some lumps and you'll lose some along the way.
Yeah.
And people are not happy about that, but most people are pretty grown up about it, and they get that. And but if you sell before a stock really takes off, oh, that just drives them nuts. I think I got more hate mail from selling a company that we had a decent win on before it went vertical or went on to higher highs. And people just that lost profit drives them crazy. And I'd always say, well, did you make money? Well, yeah. Well, okay then. As far as I'm concerned, that's really all it's about. And yeah, okay. Sometimes they go on and become 10 baggers. Well, sometimes they crater, right? That you
Yep.
you don't ever know until the bottom line is all said and done. And if you've got a big win, anything could happen next. It just makes sense. I'm much rather have my 10 baggers turn into 5 baggers and consistently make money and take profits when I have them
Yep.
than let my bets ride and have the occasional 10 baggers and have a lot more total meltdowns.
Yep. Well, but this comes back to the makeup, your psychological makeup and your
Yes.
willingness. It almost sounds like you're being a little bit more prudent or careful there.
Yeah, it is kind of funny because it's called the Speculator, independent or international, and you'd think, but it goes back to that distinction I made in the first place. You'd think it's like gambling, but no, really, the rational speculator or the patient speculator that you mentioned at the beginning, we don't just gamble, we don't just take big chances. You do everything you possibly can to make sure you win. Or let me put it this way. I'm not a huge sports fan, but I think most people understand the basics of baseball. And if you're going to swing for the bleachers, as we say, right, you're really going to put, all your weight into that swing and just try to clobber the ball out of the field. You don't do that at every ball they throw at you. You don't swing for the bleachers. Every ball that every company, every
That's right.
promoter that comes your way and puts a brochure in front of you, you wait for that perfect ball, or you wait for it to look like it's sailing right across home plate, right in your sweet spot, or you can just power that ball out of the field. So yes, I'm willing to swing for the bleachers, but I'm very choosy about which balls I take a swing at.
Mm. And I wonder, being a public figure and uh, having some need to have something to talk about, right? I would suspect there's some tension there.
Yeah, and that comes down really to the integrity of the publisher. And to their credit, the folks at Casey Research never pressured me to have, some exciting new recommendation every month, whether there was an exciting recommendation that month or not. And I'll even say, to their credit, after the Porter Stansbury bought the majority interest in Casey Research, he's famous for a lot of marketing prowess, shall we say. He absolutely told me to do the best job I could do on my research. He gave me carte blanche on whatever I needed, whoever I needed on my team, travel budget, whatever I needed to do the best research I could. So I absolutely give credit to my former employers there for not being guilty of just publishing for the sake of publishing. But I would say in my own publication now, I'm even more strict about that. And in my sales page, I tell people, try to scare people away, right? If
Yeah.
it's the wrong kind of reader who's going to be disappointed if there's not some new idea every month, I'd rather not have them subscribe, because you can't have the best idea of the year every month. That's not the way it works. You know, every idea can't be the best idea. And so my pledge isn't, you know, great ideas every month. My pledge is I only write about it when I'm absolutely convinced this is a great idea and I'm willing to
Yeah.
put my own money where my mouth is.
Well, and this is it, right? This is letting some of the pitches go by and taking some of the losses, smaller losses, a good loss.
Yes, yes. Or as Doug used to always say, you can't kiss all the girls. To which
Yeah.
I would always add, and you'd only get in trouble if you tried.
What and what about the fact that, you know, there's a lot of beta in this market, right? You know, when they all go, they all kind of go together. You know, exceptional discoveries will have their reward from time to time, but those are few and far between. Getting ahead of that is not easy.
Right. And it cuts
How,
both ways, right? An extraordinary discovery can move the entire junior sector,
yeah,
you know, in a sort of Me Too phenomenon, if you will, for investing. But it cuts the other way. If something really bad happens, like Bre-X, you know, that can take everything down, even if the company is, you know, discovering, you know, another 250,000 ounces every press release or
yeah,
something, or the company's profits are up. uh, it's interesting how much sentiment can weigh on this sector. But if that wasn't so, honestly, the opportunities for profit would be less too. It's because the junior resource sector is so volatile that such extraordinary profits are possible.
yeah. Well, and it makes the lean times that much leaner, and the fat times that much fatter, I think, too.
Sure, and in a way, that's a good thing. It separates the wheat from the chaff. You know, you can see the companies that continue to deliver. They can still raise money even in a crappy market. That really shows you who the A-team players are. And similarly, you know, that's for us as investors. But within the industry itself, in a downturn, that's when properties come on, and the savvy prospectors out there who've had their eye on interesting discoveries that, you know, didn't quite make it across the finish line, they can pick those up cheap and advance them in the next round. So it's a circle of life thing, you know. The
Yeah.
lions eat the antelopes, and everything turns into fertilizer in the end, and the next cycle keeps going.
Well, and it makes me think of one of the jokes Rick Rule talking about there at his symposium in the summer. If you were a dog, what kind of a dog would you be? And his answer that he would be a wolf, hard to kill. And interesting, you know, that occurs to me now listening to you speak here.
Well, you know, my name Lobo does mean wolf in Spanish, and I try to think of that not so much in the predatory sense, but in the sense that I can run with a pack quite effectively when I need to, but I'm quite willing to go out on my own. And as a contrarian investor, I think that's important. A lot of people think of contrarians as, oh, we do whatever is the opposite of the crowd. Well, that's not really right.
Yeah.
A true contrarian is a person who can see reality independently, you know, make a decision, stand on his or her own feet, whatever the crowd says. And, you know, sometimes broken clock is right twice a day, right? Sometimes the crowd will run the same direction as the contrarian. You
Yep.
don't bail out on a good idea just because other people noticed it, you know, late. And in fact, you're waiting for that, because that's when you have opportunity to, you know, see your share prices rise and sell to the Johnny come latelys.
When the fools rush in, you must oblige them.
Absolutely.
All these classic lines. It's such a great little community. Wonderful. And
Well,
I
sorry, I'm just thinking about that. It may sound not very nice. When the fools rush in, you must oblige them. But you could say, you know, if not you, someone, and, you know, might as well teach them a lesson. Perhaps you'll benefit them in the end as well.
and it's funny to hear you mention Bre-X, and you know how a catastrophe in one way or another can suck the wind out of the sails. There's a lot of people pretty bullish right now for good reason, and then this mine disaster
Yes,
in
yes,
Brazil.
yeah. I just wrote about that today. I think that's I don't know if you've seen that. I just published it a short while ago, but that's very much on my mind. It's not quite BRIEX, but if the mining industry doesn't, get in front of this and say, proactively before the regulars get around to painting them as evil, ne'er-do-wells who don't care about the lives of the communities around their facilities, proactively audit their mining operations, make sure that their tailings dams, all the sensors are working, and that everything is up to speed. And if I was a CEO right now, I'd be looking at my budget and seeing where I can get ahead of this and what I can do, not just for PR purposes, but for real. If I haven't been checking on the latest technology to make sure that my infrastructure is sound, and I'm the next one of these mining disasters, I could go to jail, or in some countries, you could be against the firing wall, right? Literally. This is really serious business. I mean, you can kill people if you don't get the engineering right. And
Yes.
We were talking about not just being cheerleaders, right? Not just rah, 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 yay, mining all the time. No, I think this is really serious. And I think the industry needs to get in front of this. I think they need to make sure it doesn't take the whole industry down, because this is one of the biggest mining companies in the world that has, I think the technical description is fucked up in a big way. Now, twice in a row. The first time was bad enough. Disasters happen. Hydropower dams collapse sometimes too. It's not just a mining thing. But for it to happen twice in a row to the same company operating in the same region, you have to wonder, well, how many more are there? And is this widespread? And then people start remembering Mount Poly and other mine disasters. And that's not to mention all the coal miners that keep getting trapped underground in various countries and so on. It's something that the industry, I think, has to get proactive about, because they could so easily be painted as movie-style villains, who tie girls to the railroad tracks on the weekend just for fun, if they don't.
And overcoming that, that's potentially years and decades, and just so many problems along the way.
Right. So I wouldn't sound the alarm yet saying this is a BRIEX moment. I would say that it's something the industry needs to address, and if they do it right, we can avert that.
Yep.
If they turn the blind eye, who knows? I'm sure there's already going to be tons of anti-mining activists around the world who are going to jump on this. And if there's another one, holy cow.
Yeah, watch out. Well, and the corporate social opportunity that Rick talks about from time to time, this is a little bit more extreme than some of the examples that he likes to refer to. There's clearly some responsibility here, and it's terrible and greatly concerning, as you say.
As pro-mining as I am, I'm quite willing to criticize a mining company that does something wrong.
Yes.
And Vale had 3 years after the last one to check everything, make sure everything was right. And the latest report out seems to indicate that they knew there was problems with this new one, and they pressured the inspectors to certify it anyway. If that's true, that's criminal. And I think the full penalties should apply, and heads should roll, perhaps literally.
Yeah.
They kill people, right?
Again, and it makes me think of Doug's line about the mining being an 18th century choo-choo industry.
Right.
And when he talks about that, he speaks about the opportunity to do better. And if this might be one of those moments that really starts to separate that as well.
Sure. And we have seen better. It's pretty impressive to me to watch that video, if you've seen it, of the dam, this particular dam giving way. There was a camera that was focused right on it, and you can see the thing just sort of explode and liquefy, and it's just horrifying. I've stood on those things. I've stood below those things, many times in my career. So to think of something like that happening, if you were there, you have no chance. You just could not run, drive. Superman could not get out of the way of that thing fast enough. You were standing right under it. And, so that was me. And I'm just occasionally there for the people that live in the vicinities. These companies have an absolute responsibility to do the right thing. And it's good business. I'm not just being, a tear-jerking liberal here in the American sense of that word. I think it's good business to take care of your communities, because if not, you're going to end up paying much more. And as you were saying, we can do better. I've been to places where they do have modern monitoring equipment, um, and you can see where the mine has brought wealth and prosperity to a community that's desperately needed it. And the impact, by the way, on women in poorer parts of the world tends to be disproportionately beneficial. It's amazing to see the turnaround in these communities that a modern mine can bring. So I know, because I've been there, I've seen the good that mining can do, and it would really be a tragedy if a few bad apples get the whole industry portrayed in a negative way. That's just not actually real.
Yep. Well, and it's the good that good mining can do too, right? There's some of these initiatives to get mercury out of the processing from the artisanal miners in some of these areas around the world. It's so important. And yeah,
But you're touching on another pet peeve of mine there. I don't want to go too off the side tangent here, but it just drives me crazy that the so-called environmentalists will turn a blind eye to the so-called artisan miners, who are really illegal miners,
yes.
who spill mercury all over the countryside, who strip the forest like locusts. You know, they just come and cut down all the wood they can to use in their operations. And they have no plan and no money and no intention of ever remediating after they move on. They just move on like the locusts, right? But that's okay, because these are artisan miners. But if an evil international company comes and sets up a clean modern mine and then rehabilitates the landscape afterwards, well, somehow that's bad because it's a big international company. The hypocrisy of this, and the obvious fact that it's not really about the environment, that what's driving these people, just drives me crazy. It's one of my
Yeah.
pet peeves.
Well, and it would be humorous if it wasn't so important.
Yes, yeah. I mean, and it's tragic. You go to some of these places, you fly over parts of the Amazon jungle, the sacred Amazon jungle, and they're vast swaths of desecrated land. And it's not the multinational evil mining companies doing that. It's the artisan miners.
And well, if it's not grown, it's mined too, right? To come back to that and to think about how much of the world really takes mining for granted. I think it's probably fair to say there's not a lot of knowledge in a lot of communities what mining is, what it could be, um, and increased engagement and interest kind of ties in with increased oversight within the junior mining speculative community to some
Sure.
degree too.
As you say, it would be funny if it wasn't so sad to see these NGOs fly in metal airplanes, ride in metal cars, take out their metal and glass cell phones, and to oppose mining. You know, and none of that would be possible without mining.
Yeah. Well, and an opportunity for leadership from the best companies and the best countries in the world too. These issues are so complicated too. It's not a far walk to go from there to one belt, one road, and everything that China's trying to do around the world. I've heard some controversial stuff around that recently. Maybe there's some pushback.
Yeah, I guess pulling back to the bigger picture, I'd say I believe in progress. I'm an optimist, and that doesn't mean things are hunky dory and no problem and everything will get better every day. But two steps forward, one step back. Some days it's a step back. But in general, I think things are getting better. And I mean, if you think about how mining was 50 years ago, even in the United States, right? The iron facilities on the borders of Lake Utah, just dumping all the way straight into the lake. And, there's a lot of stuff from the bad old days that, given how bad it was, it's kind of understandable in a way that mining has such a negative public awareness issue, because it was pretty bad. The very first environmental protests in the world were at the original Rio Tinto location in Spain, where they would set off these gigantic pyres of tree trunks and roast off, megatons of sulfide ore and make these giant clouds of sulfuric material going in the air, and this plume of death, 100 kilometers
Yeah.
downwind and so on. The devastation was so big that even in the 1880s, before there really was an environmental movement such as we know, people actually came from around the world to protest this because it was so visibly bad. That doesn't happen anymore. The mining industry is not what it once was. There is progress. And by the way,
Yep.
it's not just the regulators have made the miners, those evil miners, be better, and they would rape the earth if they had a chance. The miners themselves, they're not their grandfathers.
Yeah.
Most people who grew up today, they value clean air. They don't want to breathe smog. Miners don't want to breathe smog any more than anybody else does.
Yeah.
People do care. There's questions about. Sorry about that. Questions about how much we should be permitted, and what's the social good versus the cost to the environment, and so on. And those are public policy issues we can't answer today.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that the modern industry is quite different from back in the day, and most people, not just from the regulatory compliance perspective, but personally, they care and they want to do the right thing.
Yep. Well, and we talk about how can the mining sector have a boom period in a period where U.S. dollar is rising, for example, gold versus U.S. dollars. Can they both go up together? Can there be a mining bull market if rates are rising, if this is happening or that is happening? And it makes me wonder if we can have a mining bull market in the midst of a PR nightmare.
Well, hopefully we won't have one, and we will have to test that out. If it does happen, I'll tell you what, I'm not going down with the ship. I would sell my mining stocks, and I would look for something else to invest in. I'm not going to be a rah, 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 stick my head in the sand. I will keep my eyes open on that front. Fortunately, we don't seem to be there yet. But your question about, rising dollar is particularly interesting to me today, because gold and the dollar are both up this afternoon. That's the fear trade. So it's important to remember that the precious metals, while usually are trading and driven by the same factors as commodities writ large, and the commodities as a group tend to move together, not in lockstep, but they tend to average, up for some years and down for some years. There are super cycles there in which they tend to move together. But periodically, the precious metals do break out, and when you have investors feeling that needle flip from greed to fear, you will see that flight to safety drive people into both the dollar and gold and silver at the same time. That's a pretty common occurrence. I think we saw some of that today. And I think we may well see more of that this year ahead. We have some pretty interesting, tumultuous events on the calendar on the macro scale, geopolitics. That having been said, I think there's also a growing consensus amongst economists that I would tend to agree with, that the dollar is due to weaken. So we may not have a strong dollar headwind for the overall commodities group. So if that happens, if you see a weaker dollar and at the same time the trade war ends, that could be a perfect combination for commodities writ large. I'm not saying that's what will happen. Don't hold my feet to the fire on that one. I'm saying if that happens, I think that would be very, very good for commodities. But even if that doesn't happen, let's say the dollar doesn't weaken, it continues to go stronger, but we do have the end of the trade war, and maybe Brexit doesn't turn out to be the disaster so many people think it will be. Things kind of settle down. You could actually see a situation where the dollar is maybe not streaking high, hyperbolically, but it is going higher, and the global economy is recovering, and that's driving commodities higher at the same time. It's possible.
Yep. Well, and this is one of the big factors for the commodity complex is the billions and billions of people out there in the world who are becoming marginally more wealthy.
Yes.
As their life progresses, and the change in their consumption patterns of metals and food items and all this stuff is just potentially, can be very, very bullish.
Oh, absolutely. There's all kinds of research out on that. If the average Chinese person were to have the same standard of living as the average American, the amount of metals required for that to happen, like for it to physically happen in the world, it just doesn't exist from current production. That literally could not be done from the mines that we have on hand now and on tap now, all the planned projects. It just can't be done. But that's something that maybe happens over 100 years, so we don't have to worry about that anytime soon. But just it's so big that any significant steps in that direction have major implications for commodities prices.
Yeah. And that's where I think a lot of the optimism amongst the junior mining speculators, I think that's where it comes from, really.
Right. And one other thing on that subject should be said is, there's a tendency to see the industrial metals and minerals and the precious metals as contracyclical, right? You have a booming economy, everything's great. Well, we don't have fear, so the precious metals, their prices won't do well, or the opposite. But in fact, except for times of acute systemic stress, the precious metals do tend to move with the other commodities.
Yeah.
And particularly in today's world, where instead of having the impoverished masses of China that we had in previous generations, we have increasingly wealthy masses, not just a few figureheads in the Politburo or Chinese Communist Party, but large numbers of millionaires being minted in China every month, every week, maybe even every day. I don't know. They're creating more millionaires than the United States is now. And India's not far behind, right? It's not the same world. And those people, they don't see gold as some kind of crazy speculation or a barbarous relic that we only have at the Fed for reasons of tradition or something. They see gold as wealth. They see gold as a value to put your savings in. They see gold as an outward sign of their success. It's part of that, public winning the game notion of faith that's so important over there. So if the global economy takes off and China and India are growing, again, or faster again. Remember, these decreases in China are not really decreases; they're decreases in the increase. It's still growing, right? By amounts that most other countries would be jealous of.
Yep.
So as those people have more money, they buy more gold. So you could actually see a case where fear recedes entirely, but demand drives gold prices much higher.
Yep. Well, this is it. And one of the things from Frank Holmes, the meme of the love trade and the fear trade, always so effective at conveying some of these ideas.
Yeah, I need to get better at branding my ideas. I'm not so good at coming up with clever memes. I'm more the due diligence guy. I go kick the rocks and I try to make sure that I leave no stone unturned in making sure I get the best possible information for my readers.
Well, and that's your Twitter handle too. It's wonderful to see you active on social media at Due Diligence Guy on Twitter. I enjoy following you there. It's wonderful.
Well, thanks. Well, and I never meant to be a stoic or something, but my previous employers were very concerned about possible SEC violations, and I had a bit of a gag order. I was not allowed to converse with my readers or answer an email. I had to forward everything to compliance people. So now that I'm on my own, I can and do correspond with my readers. I think I'm smart enough to know when I'm giving somebody individual investment advice, which I'm not allowed to do, and I don't do. Right, but that doesn't mean I can't answer questions about the industry or commodities or something. And so I'm very happy. This is actually one of the things I like the most about being on my own, is that I can treat my customers the way I would like to be treated.
And I appreciate you taking the time to speak with me today here.
Well, sure thing.
Is there anything else you'd like to mention briefly?
Sure. Okay, so very quickly then, I am very bullish on uranium this year, but we have seen uranium stocks moving with the broader market. So even when uranium prices were going up in the last quarter, a lot of those stocks went down, and you could see it wasn't having anything to do with uranium prices. It was because Wall Street was taking it on the chin. I can't say when that ends, but when it does, I think that's very, very bullish for uranium stocks. So we didn't touch on that. So I just wanted to mention that, just sort of giving people a heads up. And to be clear, being bullish on uranium is not exactly the same thing as being bullish on the uranium stocks.
Exactly.
And be careful for that. But I think that day in the sun is coming. I'm also really impressed by the apparent about face of the Fed. And I think that is very good for gold investors this year. I think there's a good chance that 2019 could be the year that sort of long-suffering gold bugs have been waiting for a while, and I'm investing accordingly. So that's what I'm doing, and I would invite anybody who wants to have a closer look at my work to come to independentspeculator.com, and we'll do our best to help them out.
Wonderful. Well, the 2 yellow medals there, it's wonderful to hear.
Yes, indeed. Well, thank you very much, Peter. It's been a great conversation.
Appreciate it. Goodbye.